protect my people, and stand for something on January 6th. I had no intention of going anywhere near the Capitol. But when I got there and Trump had finished his speech, I had to walk past the Capitol anyways to get back to my vehicle. And I hear these fireworks, but I'm thinking it's 2 o'clock in the middle of the day. Why would there be fireworks? It's
Mhm.
overcast, no one can see the stuff. And as I got closer to the Capitol, I realized those were not fireworks.
Mm.
And I will say this till the day that I die.
Hey, it's Lou Pimber. Welcome to Lou Pimber Speaks. Man, today got a very, very special guest here with us today. But before I start, I want to remind you, listen, if you like what you hear today, give it a subscribe. If you don't like what you hear today, put a comment. Tell me what you liked and disliked. I'd love to hear from you guys. And if you know anyone out there with an incredible story, I want to share people's stories because people have stories that people want to hear about, good, bad, and indifferent, just so you know. By the way, I am the author of the book, Breaking Badly, my very own post-traumatic success story. Sharing that with you because you might have a story in you. You need to write it down. People might be interested. You just never know. But today we have a very special guest. His name is Robert Morse, okay? Let me tell you something about Robert. He's a United States Army Ranger with the 75th Ranger Battalion. He's a veteran of the United States Army. He's also an author, and he's a screenwriter as well, CEO of a company called Lego Man Productions. And then we'll talk a bit more on that in a second. High school teacher, Penn State graduate, okay? And somewhere amongst all those things, he found time to do time as a J6 political prisoner in for some incidents that happened in the Capitol. Perhaps you've heard of it. So, Robert Morse, welcome with us today, buddy. Thank you for being here.
Hey, it's an honor to be here, my friend. I'm glad to be a part of this. Lou Pimper Speaks. What's up?
Hey, thanks, man. So I met Robert. He's a very ambitious young guy. His story has moved people, and they're doing a movie. And you know, yours truly has been in a couple movies. Just wrapped the movie with Danny Trejo, and so I got invited to read. So I was very excited. Okay, that's how I met these folks. Good people. And so, Robert, tell me about where are you from originally, bud?
Yeah, so I am from Reno, Nevada. I'm a West Coast kid, actually, born
Okay.
1993. And I was raised 45 minutes away from Lake Tahoe, living off the land, hunting, fishing, fighting, backpacking, the Wild West, man. It was a lot of fun out there. Boy Scout, can still recite the Scout Law like that,
Okay.
so it was a great upbringing, raised Christian conservative, but around age of 17, I decided, hey, I'm going to go serve in the Army. And I signed the waiver in order for me to go prior to my 18th birthday. So I had my 18th birthday in basic training,
Yes.
and I deployed to Afghanistan after becoming a ranger in 2nd Ranger Battalion. So I had my 19th birthday in Afghanistan, my 20th birthday in Afghanistan on my second deployment. And then on my third deployment, I don't have a birthday, but that was my third and final trip to Afghanistan. I only had a 4-year contract with the Army. And after that, I moved to Pennsylvania. When I was in the Army, I was with 2nd Ranger Battalion stationed in Fort Lewis in Washington, in the Pacific Northwest. That was cool. So I've kind of moved around a lot. I lived
Yeah.
in Nevada, Washington State, then Pennsylvania for college, and then as you definitely hinted at, I did some time. So,
Right.
I was moving around a lot there too, but now I'm proud to be living in Texas.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I remember me and you and a couple other guys, and I was just blown away. I realized you had 3 some odd years in prison, and we'll get into those details in a minute. But man, what compelled you to join the Army? Was it the Boy Scout creed, on my honor, I'll do my best to serve God and my country and all that good stuff? Or what was
Yes.
it? What motivated you, man?
So absolutely with that involves, being raised in a very Christian conservative home. I would say that There was a essence of fidelity and pietas that I was brought up with to my country and to service. But a lot of it had to do with the fact that I watched 9/11 live when I was in the third grade, and so we were in the West Coast at the time. So I got woken up and I was told by my parents, America's under attack. And for all my friends that I would eventually meet on the East Coast, this happened in the middle of the day for them or, late morning for them. But for us in the West Coast, it happened right when, the sun was coming up. And so that's how my day started in the third grade was watching, almost 3,000 people die on live television.
Mm.
And so that moment really stuck with me in my mind. And I remember on my first deployment to Afghanistan on September 11th, 2012, before the Benghazi thing kicked off, moments prior actually, and that's a story I can talk about here in a sec. But I remember writing a letter to my dad saying that everyone in America should be here, especially on the anniversary of 9/11, hunting down the people responsible for knocking our towers down and stuff like that. The warrior spirit within all of us was definitely activated within me on 9/11.
Yep.
Combine that with the Boy Scouts, combine that with living in the Wild West, combine that with, just living out in the land, and then recognizing very early on that Jesus Christ is a warrior, and he is the most, strong, dependable, and violent man that ever walked the earth because he was willing to take on Satan and all of his demons and stuff like that. It's just been a interesting thing to zoom out and look backward and say, "Huh, this is how I got here."
Yeah, that's a lot, man. I remember 9/11 as well. I remember that morning. We had just moved into a new house, didn't have cable set up or anything, but
Mm,
I got a phone call from, my now ex-wife. She goes, "You need to turn on something." She says, "Listen to something." So I tuned in a little radio, and then I
yeah,
kinda, and I was like, "Whoa," because there's people pulled over on the side of the road crying. I was like, "Wow." And I think a lot of us patriots in our heart, patriots in our soul, something fired up, man. I mean, I
yeah,
had already served before that, and I was an undercover narco at the time, serving in that capacity. And I was like, "What can I do, man? Like,
right,
what can I do?" And I remember they called us and they put us on surveillance ops, observing certain locations for any other things that may happen. So the FBI put a lot of us, because I was part of a task force, and they said, "We need you to, if you guys can assist in this capacity." So we said, "Right on."
yeah,
But man, so you joined the army at age 17.
yes,
You did basic training. Was it at Fort Benning?
yeah, Sand Hill, baby, Echo 150.
Nice. You went there, and then you went in with the Ranger contract.
I did not. I did not.
They
No,
came in and
so
said, "Anybody want to be a Ranger? Try out."
that's what happened, yeah, so at 30th AG, the whole company there gets dared to become a Ranger.
Mm,
And that's essentially what happened. And so I had this in the back of my mind as I was persevering through basic training. I had an airborne contract. I was hoping to get stationed with the 173rd, but that was not going to end up happening. Second Airborne was going to take our entire basic training class. And
mm.
so what ended up happening was there was 8 Ranger contracts up for grabs. I did not have, I believe it's the option 40 contract where, you can just go straight from basic to RASP. But 8 were up for grabs. And out of almost 400 people within my basic training company, I got one of them. And it was because
Nice.
I could run really, really fast and for a very long time because of my cross country background.
Okay.
And I shot expert, throughout the entire time I was down because of my hunting background. So I'm a
Yes.
really good shot. I can run really fast and far. And the Rangers were like, you might make it. And I
You
took the
might stand a
dare.
chance.
Yeah,
That's awesome,
exactly. And
though.
so,
That's great.
I ended up getting the tan beret in April. And then by July, I was deployed.
I have a nephew that is at the Ranger Battalion right now. I have a son who's a MP officer. He started enlisted, offered him to become an officer, became an officer, went to school. I have a daughter serving in the Air Force in the medical field.
Amazing.
A lot of love and respect for all of our troops, man. So thank you for
Absolutely.
your service to our nation, man. And how you were in 4 years. And what
Yes.
did you learn about yourself in the Ranger Battalion? Who went in and who came out?
I would say that someone who acknowledges the sovereignty of the Almighty definitely came out more so, which actually kind of, compelled me to lean into him even further when I was incarcerated. I would say that a very naive, trusting kid walked in, and a little bit wounded but very aggressive ranger walked out. There was this picture, I won't forget it, close to the RASP barracks, where it showed a old photograph of guys, I'm assuming in the 80s, standing by a hand painted sign that said, if you kill for money, you're a mercenary. If you kill for pleasure, you're a sadist. If you kill for both, you're a ranger. I'm like, whoa, dude, what's going on here? What type of crowd am I running with,
Yeah.
But instead of walking out of there with, life altering mental wounds, which a lot of the veteran community has, I ended up having a lot of grit as well, which, now that I realize how brilliant God is as the author and the finisher of our faith, I was learning everything that I needed to survive prison while I was in Afghanistan as a ranger.
Got
And
it.
so, yeah, so when I ended up being incarcerated and surviving 3.5 years behind bars and doing time with killers and rapists and people who think the law is an absolute joke, I recognized that that was my second basic training, because the first basic training got me ready, for what I would end up enduring after January 6th, 2021.
Wow, wow. So you come out of the Ranger Battalion, and then what do you do?
I immediately go to school, man. So
Okay,
I applied to Penn State. I used my GI Bill, and
okay.
it was on my first deployment to Afghanistan actually that I realized that the wasteland of Afghanistan was going to follow me home to America if the next generation did not know how to keep this republic. So what dawned on me was that if a wasteland like this, who's never known freedom, who's never known or understood individual sovereignty, never even had a chance to, and this would find its way home to America, I can stop that myself if I get into the classroom and I can teach these kids to hang on to the freedoms that they inherit without having to watch them go up in flames before they ever enjoy them. And you and I both understand that our nation is under siege, not just physically, but also culturally and spiritually as well. And so our nation is kind of cracking at the seams in a way because not enough people value what our founding fathers bequeathed to us. And that was my job. And I knew that that was my job from my first deployment. So I had no ambition of reenlisting in the Army. The minute I was out, I used my GI Bill, go to Penn State, got a degree in secondary education. I wanted to be that high school history teacher, man. And I graduated college in December 19th, 2020. 2 weeks later, I'm at the Capitol on January 6th.
Okay, all right. So, I love history, by the way. I love history, and you brought up a very, very good point. Very good point. They're not teaching it in school anymore the way they
No,
should.
no,
They're not teaching it just in the literal sense. This is what it was. This is
right.
what happened. This is the way it
Yes,
worked out. This, and you draw your own conclusion from it. There's a
exactly.
slant. There's a
Yep.
slant. I'm here in
They teach
Texas.
in reverse.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I'm here in Texas, and they're teaching these kids. They're reteaching slavery from the point of view of you're still a victim. Like they're
Right.
constantly opening up that wound. They're
Yes.
constantly.
Yes.
I'm originally born in Mexico. You don't hear that about that in Mexico. We went through a similar struggle the native Mexicans did from the
Mm,
Spaniards, but that wound doesn't open up all the time.
right.
When that memory comes up, it's because we were victors, we sacrificed, and yes,
Yes.
some people lost, but that's just life, man. And so we look at it
Yeah.
that way, at least, right? So okay,
You
very
bring
good.
up a good point as well with being a native to Mexico. I mean, my mind is already spinning in like three different directions, but one of the things that I recognized when I went to Mexico for the first time, I went to the Yucatan Peninsula. Most people, when they go to Cancun, they go to party. Well, I went to explore. I wanted to see the ruins and the monuments and things like that. And so one of the things that I learned was that there is a huge divide culturally and genetically within Mexico of the Spaniards and the
Yeah,
Mayans,
yeah,
and Mexico has their own racial tensions. And it made me realize, man, every country has their own racial tensions. But if you keep exacerbating them as opposed to trying to find ways in which the races have a lot in common, you're always going to have a problem. See, this is the way the Marxists keep people divided, and they keep feeding the victimhood mentality of all these kids that don't want to grow up and stay in Neverland because of how comfortable things are here in the West, is by saying, hey, look, we'll never solve slavery, so you'll always have someone to complain about and or for. Whereas you could have the opposite happen where we teach these things. Yes, slavery happened, but we moved on. We had a whole conflict and a movement to make sure that no man would be enslaved with founding documents that say that all men are created equal. And then on its face, now that we can celebrate the fact that we don't have slaves anymore in America, as opposed to digging up, old bones and saying, what have we done? Man, we can move on too. That's also an option.
Yep,
And
yep.
so, yeah, there's so many things to be said, and I agree with you. And that's why I say that in education, they're teaching in reverse. They give you what you're supposed to think first, and then teach you the context. Whereas you want the context first, and then we can make up our own mind, so that we have
Right.
the freedom of thought.
They set it up for you. Here's how I want you to look at it.
Exactly. They
It's
frame
like
it.
a sale. It's like a sale is
Hmm.
taking place. They say,
Yes.
look at it from this lens, and then, oh, by the way, this is what happened. But you're looking at it from this lens, so that's all you're
Yep.
seeing, almost
Yep.
with blinders. And you're right.
And
In
that
Mexico,
sale. Well, go ahead.
what?
I want to hear more about Mexico.
In Mexico, you have that area you went to, you see a lot of native Mexican people there. There are still
Yes.
native people. And a lot of them speak a whole entirely different language. They don't speak Spanish. They speak an
No.
entirely different language. And then there's still natives like Tarahumara, the Mayans. There's all these Yucatecos. There's all these people that are in that area, and entirely different language. Do and there's still that internal strife that happens sometimes because you mentioned, racism and all that stuff, identity and all that stuff, or race identity. It's an easy match to light. Psh, boom, there it is.
Yes.
You bring it up, psh, people's feelings get hurt right away. They light it
Yes.
real quick. Boom, they light it real quick. And
Yes.
so, as a kid, I used to hear that sort of stuff. I never fell for it because people would say stuff to me, like my little homeboys, stuff like that. Even some teachers, and they want me to be part of movements like La Raza movement, stuff like that, right? And I was like, you know what? No, no, because I attended those groups gatherings once or twice, and the things they said weren't the things that I was living. Yes,
Yeah.
I was poor. Yes, I was in Section 8. Yes, all these things. But no, the people that were saying they were doing all these bad things were not. Not to me, they weren't. They're the ones who helped me. They're the ones
Yes.
who took me to the secondhand store to get clothes. They're the ones who took me to eat. They're the ones who drove me home
Mm.
sometimes, or my sister home sometimes because, a lot of reasons. And so they were driving this hate, this bias ideology, this bigot type ideology that I didn't like. It just didn't ring true to me. And for the weak minded, the person who's not solid in their core and their person, boop, hook, line, and sinker, man.
I agree
So
with that. And to piggyback on that point and to kind of bring it back to our discussion, I think that that's one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to make the production company that I have, is because I see how many within our youth today have bought the Marxist lie, hook, line, and sinker. One, because they haven't been exposed to an alternative, but the pointing the finger approach is much easier, and it's simpler, and it costs less time for you to think there's the culprit for all my issues. But you forget that you got three other fingers pointing right back at you.
yeah,
And the American ideal is to blame yourself for all of your problems so that you can be responsible for your own uplifting, and God can guide you that direction. When you take responsibility upon yourself and you say, you know what? If I want this kind of life, I'm going to make it happen. And because of our meritocracy and capitalist society that we've been trying to maintain here in America, as well as a very federalist and a low government, states' rights type of understanding within, our law and system, that's possible. And only in America can someone run here from another country, make a name for themselves, start a business, and provide for the next generation, as opposed to having to survive the scourge of tyranny in other places all around the world that I walked through while I was deployed. So you and I both have seen the other side of the cradle that America has become, where the outside world is a very savage place. But if we don't educate the kids enough to maintain what we have here and to protect what we have here, we will invite the end of the world in on our own watch. and the whole city of Rome will burn as the Visigoths invade and destroy the empire forever. And so that's what I'm trying to stop with Lego Man Productions.
Right
And
on,
I
man.
know that it's possible because when you tell better stories, you actually promote better behavior. The story that is being told, this is a great way to bring it all together from what we've been talking about. The story that these kids are told in school is that every single one of your ancestors is wrong. You're better than them. Your desires are better than theirs. And so you should eat, drink, and be merry on behalf of those who built the world for you. They didn't know what they were talking about. Follow the stomach of which is your God, as it discusses in the book of Philippians, and have at it. Do as thou wilt. What we can do, though, is teach a better story using the example of our founding fathers, using the example of, some of the people that survived January 6th, for example, or using the story like what we're building up to after the January 6th movie is a Roman epic about men who did everything within their power to set aside Rome as a republic, as
Hmm.
opposed to a kingdom or an empire. So there's a lot going on, a lot of moving pieces, but if you want a better people, you got to tell a better story. And that's what Lego Man Productions is doing.
I love it, man. So you graduate from the university,
Yeah.
and then somehow you end up at the Capitol. Where were you living at the time? Were you in where were you
I
at?
was in Pennsylvania, yeah, so
Okay,
so
so you weren't too
in the
far.
near
Did you
yeah, I
get
wasn't too far,
you get invited? Was there a group text? What happened? How did you say, "I'm gonna go to the Capitol"? What happened?
right? Well, that's the interesting thing, man, and I look back, I'm like, "God, you were involved the entire time." Because had I not moved to Pennsylvania, I was in Nevada, I might never have gone to the riot. And it wasn't a riot at first. It was the Stop the Steal rally. But I'm hanging out in my apartment and the pandemic happens. They lock us up. You got the vaccine mandates, which I never took. I'm a pure blood, proud of it. And, but
Yeah.
it was absolutely ridiculous. So in one news segment, they'll tell you, stay at home. You can't go to church. Mom and pop shops have to close down. The middle class is now going to suffer, blah, blah, blah. You can't attend any super spreader events, no concerts, nothing like that. But then on the next news segment, you have mostly peaceful protests where everybody's hanging out, everybody's breaking the 6 foot rule, and everybody's burning down the town, which NPR had to admit through their teeth that the demographic that suffered the most from the Black Lives Matter riots was the black small business owner because
Yeah.
those storefronts went up in flames.
That was
So you
horrible.
have two totally diametric opinions coming out of the mouths of the talking heads on the media. Then the vaccine mandates are happening. People are dying because of the vaccine, and then they steal the election. So I was pissed. And very similar to I felt that very familiar call on my heart that you have to get involved. It was like Uncle Sam was pointing right at me again in 2020. And when they stole the election, because I know for a fact Sleepy Joe did not get more votes than Barack Obama from his basement. We all know that
Right.
now for a fact, but you did not outpace Trump, who was packing every single place he went to in 2020. It's just the numbers don't even add up. And so when we watched the fraud happen at 3 o'clock in the morning on technically November 4th of 2020, I had it, dude. I wasn't affiliated with any of the Oath Keepers of the Proud Boys. I was just a kid from Reno, stranded in Pennsylvania, close enough to the Capitol. I'm like, you know what? I'll show up. And I didn't have any ambition whatsoever to go near the Capitol. When you look up my name, Robert Morse, January 6th, you'll see me in the same plate carrier and uniform that I deployed to Afghanistan in 3 times. And the prosecutors and the judges and everybody in between said, oh, well, he dressed up for war that day. Clearly, he's wearing, battle hardened gear. And what they don't understand is that I had dressed up in the uniform that I deployed to Afghanistan in 3 times to symbolize that I had already invested into the future of my country. I had
Yeah.
already given the sweat and blood equity so that my country and the people that I'll never meet would remain free. So I wore that stuff as a symbol more than anything. Like why does Batman have a bat on his chest? Because he's
Right.
trying to communicate something as he saves the day. And there was also a bunch of threats. So for example, a lot of people don't understand this either. There were 2 rallies prior to January 6th. There's the Million MAGA March, and then there was the Jericho March, all happening in DC prior to January 6th Stop the Steal rally.
Okay.
Both of those featured Antifa attacking the MAGA people, whether they were getting jumped on their way back to their cars or being stabbed like Noblebeard was stabbed, or
Wow.
having Molotov cocktails thrown at them, or being, beat up. My gosh, it was terrible. So I'm watching this footage of my people being attacked by a bunch of communist dickheads. And
Yeah.
now I'm thinking, man, I really got to get involved.
Yeah.
So if anyone's going to have to attack grandma and grandpa who love their country like I do, they got to get through me. So I had two attitudes: protect my people and stand for something on January 6th. I had no intention of going anywhere near the Capitol. But when I got there and Trump had finished his speech, I had to walk past the Capitol anyways to get back to my vehicle. And I hear these fireworks. But I'm thinking it's 2 o'clock in the middle of the day. Why would there be fireworks? It's
Hmm.
overcast, no one can see the stuff. And as I got closer to the Capitol, I realized those were not fireworks, those were flashbangs. And I will say this till the day that I die, and you can ask any other January 6er, the police that were commissioned on that day to be present, which Mayor Bowser and Nancy Pelosi wiped a lot of the people that should have been there from the Capitol Police, and you can check those records and they pan out. The people that were there were either underqualified or totally down with the system to make sure that they would provoke violence from an unassuming crowd of Trump supporters who watched the pandemic, watched their small businesses fail, watched the election get stolen, and watched the one president that they had finally voted for that really made some change lose an election that they know he really didn't,
Right.
all at once. And now you're going to point a gun in their face and shoot a flashbang or chemical irritants that every single veteran had to endure in order to pass through basic training. This
Hmm.
is the perfect storm to galvanize people with no criminal records whatsoever, like myself, into a lobster trap that January 6th was, so that the very people who would do something about it, like stand up for freedom, fight for their country, be proud of their founding fathers and of Trump, would end up being wiped out, thrown into the gulags, so that Biden would have no opposition whatsoever for his presidency and the eventual annihilation of the republic. That was the game plan.
Yeah. That is so. Assuming all of that is 100% true and accurate, it's so heartbreaking to think that someone would go through the process of thinking it through like that with that intention
Yes.
in mind, or even if that whole intention wasn't in mind, that would have been their end result and they would have been
The
happy with
result,
it.
yeah. Yeah.
They would have been happy with it. So you're there, you're wearing your gear as a means to kind of represent who you are. And when you first got there, what did it look like? What did you see when you first got there?
Dude, it was awesome. It was a party. I've never seen more
That's what I
people in my
yeah.
entire life. Yeah, dude, it was the coolest thing, man. You had people from all walks of life, all across the planet, not just the country, showing up, proud of their country, proud of their home, proud of the red, white, and blue, proud of Trump. I mean, you had people from New Orleans passing out blunts left and right. You had people from California, Maine, Florida, all over the place. People from Canada, people from Japan flew in, people from Alaska, Hawaii flew in. They're like, this is it, man. And everybody believed that the election was going to be corrected, that Trump was going to save the day, and that everything was going to be fine. And once Trump didn't really reveal the Trump card that we anticipated, I think a lot of people kind of were like, man, we got excited for nothing. And so you kind of had you had that party aspect. People were praying, people were singing Amazing Grace. People were so proud to express their Christian faith that they too, begging God for a miracle, begging that something would happen. But the interesting thing is, and the more that I read the Bible, this is what I learned, is that God never provides miracles the way that we hope or expect. But he does give miracles to the degree that his plan is fulfilled. And so, oddly enough, and we know this from Genesis 50, where the plans of men were designed to destroy, but God was always involved to make sure that the plans of men actually ended up prospering those that he cares for and love him. January 6th might have been one of the best things that ever happened to America. And this is why I say that, is because you had, first, an opportunity for people to express their national pride. Second, to show the deep state and the globalists that we still got plenty of people in this country that are willing to fight for what we have, especially in the state of Texas, Pennsylvania, Florida, and Texas. supplied the most amount of January 6ers that day. And the third thing was that because January 6th happened, it actually activated so many more people to get involved in our nation's freedom and our government more than ever, to liberate people like me, or for Donald Trump to say, you know what, they did this to my people. I can't give up. And I'm going to say this right now, and I know this for a fact. When Donald Trump would call Mickey Whithoff, the mother of Ashley Babbitt, the woman that was killed that day among three other patriots, Donald Trump told Mickey that I think about those January Sixers in that DC gulag every night before I go to sleep. So we very well might have been one of the reasons why, among many, that he couldn't give up, so that he would stay the course, and that why and so many other Americans would stay the course, so that something like this would never happen again. And that's the result. They should have left us alone. They should have just let it lie, because now Trump's back with a vengeance. He's got a cabinet that can actually get things done. And now there's 1,500 people who did time, whether it was 1 day or 4 years, that will never give up and will never forget what the government did to us. And as a result, you have things like this. You have a book that James O'Keefe literally compared to Alexander Solzhenitsyn's The Gulag Archipelago,
Wow.
right here, called Still There, with 41 short stories in my 3.5 years behind bars. And it's not only loaded with what happened to me from day one to day zero when it all ended and then some, but it's loaded with scripture. It's loaded with the meat of the word, and it's loaded with tips and tricks of how you too can survive something as gargantuanly impossible as having your dignity, your liberty, and your background and sacrifice totally stripped from you. And yet, because Christ remains, you can survive as well. And so, if you want to have any idea what it's like to be a January 6th political prisoner, but don't want to storm the Capitol, here's your opportunity to learn how and to be motivated more than ever to save your country.
Can you put it more in the middle so we can see the whole cover, please?
There you go, right there.
Okay. Still there, Robert Morse. Wow. One stories you said?
41 short stories. 41
Wow.
is the number of deliverance in the Bible.
Well, thank you for writing that. I'm gonna get it. I'm gonna have to order that, man. And next time I see you, I'll have you sign it for me. I'm a big
I'll
reader.
see you soon. I'll see you soon.
I read stuff all the time, man. I read stuff all the time. Oh, so you're there, uh, um, and at which point, what did you do?
Well, I was going to go to the bathroom and leave.
Right.
When I, yeah, when I saw that the Capitol Police was opening fire on that crowd, that's when I got sucked in like a moth
Uh,
to the flame. And this is specifically what happened. I noticed the largest pro Trump Asian Pan Pacific group that I had ever seen in my entire life that was proud of their American citizenship, but also representing their Pacific heritage, whether
yeah,
they fled from Korea, China, Vietnam, Laos, you name it. All of these people were so grateful to be Americans, and they have all seen communist dictatorships and takeovers personally happen in their country. So when they notice something happen here on American soil, you don't have to ask anybody who just, watches CNN or Fox News if this is a communist takeover. How about you ask someone who actually lived through it? Like someone who watched the Tiananmen Square massacre. And then you figure out whether or not that the Biden regime was a communist dictatorship or not. So that group of people right there, of the thousands, were also migrating over toward the Capitol because we were told there was going to be a second set of speeches there. And as they migrated, they had placed their old and their young and their women in the middle and had the men encircling around them like elephants would in the wild to protect their young. And I literally watched the Capitol police officers arc their grenade launchers to the degree that they knew when they fired that round, it could arc enough and detonate amongst the faces of the women and the children and the old. And that's exactly what I saw happen. I watched those kids get blown up, rewind back to Afghanistan. I'm already wearing the uniform, bro. And that's what got me to run in.
you're fired up.
I'm fired up, dude. And I'm pissed because my people, yet again, are having to suffer right before my eyes. And there's nothing I can do to stop.
So you saw that your instinct to defend folks like that kicks in, and where did you go into the Capitol? Or how did you get in there?
So there was a large crowd amassing in front of the Capitol at first. And when I got there, there's an ocean of people to get through. I noticed that the police were doing these pop shots and then taking cover behind the bike racks that they had reassembled, kind of as like a barrier. And, this is on camera and I have no shame in, talking about any of this. I noticed that there was the push back and forth for the barrier. The rioters, that were just peaceful protesters, but now that have been activated, not just by the Capitol Police, but this is also confirmed by the Antifa within the crowd that had disguised themselves as Trump supporters. And this is something that I can verify because I did time with Antifa members who signed a
Mm,
really bad contract. They admit it, and they were Antifa from the start. They admit they're proud communists, and they admit that they showed up to January 6th to get Trump supporters shot and killed. This is a quote from a guy named Josiah Kenyon, who I name drop in this book, Proud
wow.
Communist, and you can see him on all the J6 stuff. But, anyways, so there's Antifa members in the crowd disguised as Trump supporters. There's police officers who have orders, instigate the crowd, and then you have guys like me in the middle who now have no choice. We're literally in between a rock and a hard place. So I'm noticing that in this struggle, there is that gate, that bike rack little gate thing that they've made. And everyone's pushing on it. And now it's like a push match. Well, I think, you know what? No one's pulling it. So I tell someone to my left and to my right, hang on to my plate carrier. When I say three, yank with all of your strength. And I grab onto that bike rack and I whoom, give the order. We absorb the gate into the crowd, us exposing the police completely. They have no protection of a bike rack anymore so that we can get to them and beg them to stop. I never struck a cop in the face. But what the judge repeated over and over and over again in my court proceedings was, and I quote, Robert Morse approaches the police officer line and questions, how much did they pay you to betray your country? Now, you know this better than anybody because your time in law enforcement. The first responsibility of any officer of the law showing up to a scene is to de escalate tension, to de escalate force, to preserve life and uphold the law. They
Right.
did the exact opposite. They escalated force, they escalated tensions. They were picking people out of the crowd to inflict harm on, and it just so happened to be the old ladies, the women. You've got video footage of my buddy Phil Vogel. He's flipping the bird to the cops. 2 seconds later, a police officer decides to shoot a grenade, not at him, but at his wife. There's
Wow.
footage of old ladies asking, what's wrong with you? Why are you doing this? And a police officer emerges from the line with a shield, bashes her in the face, so much so that she falls back. She gets caught by the crowd. She comes back again. What are you doing that to me for? Boom, hit again. So, and it
Wow.
doesn't take long for people to look into January 6th footage and realize that time and time again, protesters are trying to calm tensions down and they do subside for a while. But then someone, either within the Antifa or the police line, instigate tensions again so that this riot can keep going. I don't have a copy here in front of you, otherwise I would hold it up, but I break it down in the book that I actually wrote with Kelly Meggs, the leader of the Florida Oath Keepers chapter, while we were locked up and had this book smuggled out of prison. It's called One Question Remains. And we essentially break down every point of the riot and how we were lured into a lobster trap. And the goal of doing this to us wasn't just to inflict pain and wasn't just to make it look bad for the optics sake, though it was successful at that. The point was to use Donald Trump's own supporters as a battering ram to halt the proceeding of the Electoral College results being certified by a joint session of Congress. Because had that proceeding continued, the congressman from Arizona and Ted Cruz both declared prior to January 6th that they were going to contest the stolen election and send the electors back to the states, get alternate electors, and re examine the election results. Well, the Democrats can't have that because they stole the election. And if there's a reexamination period and alternate electors are selected, like it was in the 1800s when President McKinley ran for president, so we've been here before as a country. We're doing a little history here right now. You're in Mr. Morse's history class, and I go into this in One Question Remains as well. If that would have happened, the stolen election would have been exposed. So how do they make sure that that doesn't happen? They make sure that the very people that are waving all the Trump flags and back the blue flags and had the president's back and supported the police all throughout the riots of 2020 are now used against Trump so
Right.
that the election result counting gets halted. And when they reconvene at 3 o'clock in the morning, nobody has the guts to say, maybe we should follow through with our plan. No, they're going to certify that election because the pressure that was just created from the absolute insanely brilliant chess match that just played out right before them.
Man, so many questions that can be asked of the right people. If we can talk to Nancy Pelosi, find out
I know,
what
right?
what she
Well,
did.
luckily she admits responsibility in her daughter's documentary. So
She does. Wow. Talking to and all those other people. I'm so disappointed in the Democratic Party, to be honest with you, man. As a kid, I grew up, I was born a Democrat, I guess, as a kid. But then I started listening. I used to listen to talk radio as a little kid, in Spanish. And they would
mm,
say, hey, los republicanos no quieren a los mexicanos. Republicans don't like Mexicans. They don't like poor people. I'm like, that's me, bro. But then I started
yeah,
listening. Then I started observing. Then
mhm,
Ronald Reagan ran for office. And I was like, oh, I was
yes,
terrified because he's one of those guys. And I started listening
yeah,
to him. I started listening to him. And I'm like, Mom, he says the same stuff that you guys say to me. Like
mm,
accountability, you know,
yep,
chanclazos, all these things, accountability, we're almost saying the same thing. And it was Ronald Reagan who really like opened my eyes to the nonsense
yes,
Democratic Party. But they've just gone so far to the left. And it
yeah,
slowly but surely, we are exposing, well, not we, but the government is exposing what the motivation is behind it, and it is money.
yes,
Minnesota, California, it's money. And
yep,
damn it, it pisses me off to have to admit that, man.
yeah,
I was just a staunch protector of our elections
yeah.
against my friends from Mexico that were, in the politics. And they'll say, "You guys are gonna have the same." I was like, "No, we're not. We're America, bro." And I was like, "Oh, dude."
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, such a hard pill to swallow, man. So you're in there, and at which point do you get inside?
So I snuck in through a window that had been broken before I walked up to it. I was
Huh?
just curious what it looked like inside there. I was like,
Yeah.
I want to check this out. So many people were going in and out. I was like, I've never been in here. I just want to see. So I got in there. What I saw when I entered the window that just led to, I believe, a senator's office shocked me. And it wasn't MAGA. The furniture had been destroyed. People were urinating and defecating in the corner of the room. And people in black clothing were running in and out of there. And one guy walks up to me, taps me on the shoulder, and says, "Hey, use this." And he hands me a bunch of batteries duct taped together. I'm like, "The hell is this?" He goes, "Well, it's a fist pack. So when you punch a cop, it lands harder." I'm like, "I'm not doing this. It's like, what are you talking about?" And it was at that point when, the kind of like the adrenaline wore off. And I started to look around. I'm like, I have no idea who any of these people are. I need to get out of here. And I really felt that tug of my heart from the Holy Ghost saying, okay, you made your point, go. And it was around the time of sunset, anyways. I'm like, yeah, we need to leave. And I had shown up there with a couple of friends, but at this point in time, I'd been separated. And mysteriously enough, all of us kind of, culminated again back together and we kicked rocks. And on the drive home from the Capitol, I opened up my phone back when I used to have a Facebook, and they had already superimposed an image of the Capitol on fire, calling it the bloody insurrection.
I saw
And I
that.
thought, oh no, we're in trouble,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you leave, and at which point so you leave, you come home, you're back in Pennsylvania, or where you at?
Yeah, so I'm back in
Okay.
Pennsylvania.
And
And the
so
funny thing is, the very next day, I had a job interview at Anytime Fitness to be a personal trainer. So I show up to the job interview with a black eye, a busted lip, a bruise on my chin, a limp, and I've got a three-piece suit on and a leather briefcase, and I smoke the interview. I do a great job. I get the job, but I know for a fact the employers are like, "Who is this guy?" So that's what I mean. I had no intention of taking over the government, man. I had no intention of taking over the government. I had a job interview the very next day.
of becoming a tier 1 terrorist.
Right, on the FBI's Most Wanted. Oh, you know what though? I can't go any further without telling the best part of this whole thing, because this is one of the reasons why we named the company what we did, is because when the FBI came to arrest me,
Yeah,
June 11th,
yeah.
2021, I had been a teacher in the classroom for 6 months, almost 6 months. So every single day I went to school knowing that the education of my students was worth more than my discomfort or my fear. I walked in and out of that classroom. I taught a great lesson with the Damocles sword hanging over my head the entire time, because I was going to fulfill what I set out to do from my first deployment, which was be that teacher and be that difference in the classroom, even though I was like one of the few Republicans in the district at the time in Pittsburgh. But when they came to arrest me, the FBI acts like they find the holy grail of January 6th because they come across none other than a Lego model kit of the United States Capitol.
So wait a minute. So they used the Lego model kit. Was it put together? Or was it just still a box?
It was in the box, man.
It wasn't even assembled yet.
No,
Then when I was a kid, I must have conspired for all kinds of stuff. See, because I had boxes
right?
of all kinds of stuff.
That's
All
what I
right. So
mean.
they
Like,
use
come on.
when we spoke about this before in Dallas, I could have sworn it was like the whole model put together and they like,
Oh,
and you had all and they, and so it's just a box of the Capitol,
yes.
which was part of your curriculum. You're applying to your curriculum as a teacher.
Come on. I'm a history teacher. What do you expect?
And that was their evidence. What else? What are the evidence that they have against you to say, hey, this guy was a tier one?
Holy Bible and a Gadsden flag
Damn, a Holy Bible, a Gadsden flag, a box of the Lego man
and a box
box
of
of the
Lego
U.S.
Capitol
Capitol.
set. Yep.
And did they in any way take into consideration when they sentence you your time in service in the military?
They used it against me. They actually said that I'm a danger to society, though they have absolutely no evidence to suggest that I'm a danger to society whatsoever. Matter of fact, they knew who I was 1 week after January 6th, but they let me be amongst minors for almost 6 months, and but only after my arrest am I a danger to society and a flight risk. See, they have no standing. They make these statements. The prosecution writes the script for the media, and then it's something that our founding fathers really wanted to avoid when they designed our Constitution. And it's a remarkable document because it includes more of what's known as rights of the accused than any other document known to mankind at that time. And so my constitutional rights were absolutely shredded. You know, they find a journal in the bottom of my, middle console of my Jeep, which they didn't have a warrant to go through, by the way. And they run through the pages. They didn't ask whether or not I had had this journal since I was a Ranger or not. But in the Ranger handbook, it specifically says if America were to be invaded, every Ranger is supposed to disband from their battalion, go back to their homes, and raise up a militia to defend the homeland. Quote me on it, research it, if that's what it says. And so in this journal that I had had for almost 10 years at that point, I had the words how to build a hometown militia because that's part of the Ranger curriculum. Well, they find
Mm,
this and they say Robert Morse is over here building a militia without any evidence for that. It's just a claim, it's just
yeah,
libel that they can
yeah.
get away with. And so they used all of that against me. They had the gall to say that while I was in the classroom as a teacher, and you already know how much this means to me, that I was making homegrown terrorists in the classroom. And that's what I was using my passion as a teacher for.
When they came to arrest you, what was that like?
Frankly, it was bittersweet because the feeling of being hunted ended finally. I knew that I was being hunted. They
Yeah.
were not slick. I knew that I was being followed. I knew that I was being surveyed. And I knew that at any point in time, my life would be over. But I also knew that the hero's journey officially began, where I was going to be thrown into the underworld. And I don't know if you're a student of the mythic hero's journey at all, but I mean, it's something that I study because I've lived it. But ultimately, the hero begins his journey in one of two ways. He either volunteers for it or he gets abducted into it. And I would say that being taken from my home on the last day of school of the school year would certainly qualify as being abducted into the hero's journey to be thrown into the underworld of the American prison system. But that's exactly what happened. And so bringing the conversation back full circle, my reliance on God multiplied by tenfold because I knew the only way out was through Him, and my only way out was through the prison system. I was denied bond 3 times. I was given a sentence of 5.5 years. Technically, I would maybe be getting out to a halfway house right now had I not been pardoned
Let
by
me let
President
me stop you
Trump.
for a second. When they came to get you, was it like a full on, like HRT, FBI came, or local SWAT came
Yeah.
to get you? The whole
Well, I was outnumbered 10-1, man. Oh, yeah. They used the same tactics that I recognized from my time in Ranger Battalion, which they might have done deliberately to just twist the knife into the wound a little bit more. But oh, yeah, they raided my house. They had a support by fire line. They had a bunch of those teams show up. Dude, I was surrounded by loaded rifles pointed at me.
so they take you in the this is in your house. They take you into custody, and um, you had at which point when from the time they took you into custody, how long did it take for you to see a judge or to make a phone call?
Well, I didn't see a judge until I would say several weeks in, who just essentially said, "You're not getting out anytime soon." I was able to make a phone call when I got to the FBI headquarters because I asked for it. They also wanted me to talk, and I said, "I'm not talking to you guys at all." And so I did get that phone call, and it was so strange too. I remember thinking in the midst of this, like, I'm in a movie. Like never in my entire
Yeah,
life would I ever thought that my life was headed in this direction, but I'm in a movie right now. And so,
yeah.
you gotta ask for your phone call. I've seen enough movies to know that. And so I used my phone call and I admit how far up shit creek I was. And it was very, very heartbreaking to watch how many friends and family fell by the wayside because of my involvement at January 6th. My father wants nothing to do with me. My brother has totally forsaken me. A vast majority of the friends that I had in Pennsylvania no longer speak to me. It's
Wow,
absolutely crazy. Even after all this stuff has come out and all the work that I've done to show that I'm not the monster that the mainstream media said I was, fear and intimidation is a hell of a weapon in the communist states of the United States.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that was
yeah.
the point. They arrested us the way that they did, not for my destruction, but for the destruction of the republic to intimidate everybody else. We'll do this to you too if you decide to rise up against the state.
That was insane. So they picked you up that way. They lock you up. You get your phone call. Were you ever like in a solitary confinement kind of environment, or where they put
Yes.
you at it? At which point was your trial? Did you have a speedy trial, or what happened?
I had a trial well after a year and a half into my incarceration.
Oh, damn. In the year and a half, what was going on then?
I was being bounced around to county jails, which are notoriously the worst.
Yeah,
Jails are actually designed so that people take a plea deal. They're supposed to be awful. They're supposed to be void of color. They're supposed to be extremely violent. The diet is supposed to be awful. And everyone knows that within the DOJ. So what they did was they deliberately prolonged all of these trial dates and or sentencing dates so that we never go to prison until maybe your 3rd year of being incarcerated. And so
wow.
I didn't have a trial until after a year and a half into my incarceration. And then I didn't get sentenced until 2023. And then even after that, I was stuck in Philly, where we ended up writing One Question Remains. I was there for well over 2 months, eating dog food, like I had been for the last 2.5 years. And then when I finally ended up going to prison, I was only there for about 11 months because I sued the warden of my prison for not giving me the first step back time credits and good time credits that I had earned. That, ironically enough, Donald Trump signed into law in 2018. Obama didn't do it, Trump did. And the entire black demographic that's locked up were all on Team Trump because they knew that he was letting brothers out. Not Obama, but Trump was letting people out
Yeah.
of jail and of prison. And it
Yep.
was Donald Trump that was trying to make sure that the BOP got totally reinvigorated so that way less people had to do overblown sentences, which is a huge financial burden on the American taxpayer. And so it's crazy, man. It's been an absolute nut. Like I said, you can learn all about this stuff in here because the
Sure.
timeline that I lay out, like every different place. For example, like this chapter is called "We Know About the Fight," and it starts in Northern Neck Regional Jail, 2022. So you can actually kind of chronologically follow me throughout in that book. Still there.
So you're in there. You don't. You don't see a trial until after a year and a half. You're being moved around different jails around the country. I can see why they were doing that, to kind of wear you down. And were you assigned a defense attorney?
So I
Did
was
you see
initially
this person regularly?
yeah, so I was designated someone who initially told me that we can take a plea for 7 to 8 years, or we can take it to trial if you want. I'm like, that is the last thing I want to hear from a public defender. Like, I've never broken a law in my life. I no criminal history. Don't tell me to sign a plea for 7 to 8 years, which
Wow.
would make me admit to things that I didn't do. And that's the interesting thing. There's
Right.
another whole chunk of conversation that needs to happen because a lot of folks were told that there's a bunch of violent offenders. However, the plea deal that was given to a lot of these folks that never done time before, so they were extremely intimidated, included violent offenses that you had to admit that you did, that there's
Wow.
no video evidence that you actually participated in.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you're in there after you're convicted. What prison were you sent to?
I was sent to Loretto Prison in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, okay, got it. And how much time did you do there?
I want to say I was there for about 11 months.
Got it.
I walked out of there on August 29th, 2024, and was shipped to the Pittsburgh halfway house. Yeah.
And so you get released the night of the election, the night Donald Trump was
Well,
sworn
the
in.
the night of the pardon. Yeah, what
You were
happened
pardoned.
on January 20th. So
Got it.
we watched the election, and we were so thankful that Trump won. And he stopped the yard like we knew he was gonna, because Kamala Harris sucks and she's terrible.
I know.
But he gets in there, and I would say that a week out, we were all devastated because JD Vance gets up there and he says, well, only the non-violent January 6ers are going to get pardoned. But like I just explained to you, there was a huge
Right.
discrepancy because a lot of these violent offenders did things that they were forced to sign a plea deal to say that they did. And so, but here's the funny thing, and this is how you know God's involved. Right before Biden leaves office, he gives preemptive pardons to everybody that was on the J6 panel. He
Insane.
pardons his son. He pardons
Insane.
all these people that were pedophiles and rapists within the very halfway house that I was in Pittsburgh. So that also motivates Trump to say, you know what? If Biden's going to pardon all these people, I am too.
Yeah, that was nuts, man. That was nuts. So where are you at now, buddy? What's going on with you now? You got Lego Man Production. You're a
That's right.
screenwriter. You're an author. You wrote a screenplay to the movie called Love on the Run.
Yes.
You met the love for the rest of your life there somewhere along the way. She was also a fellow,
Yeah. Yep.
right?
So I'll break down the timeline for you. I get pardoned. I immediately start a company to
Mhm.
create faith-based films worth fighting for, to
Okay.
reclaim our culture, and to reinvigorate our heroes of the West.
Okay.
While I was locked up, I wrote a script for a Roman epic, but instead of selling it off and maybe making a couple $100,000 or $1 million because it's that good of a story and it's based off of a bunch of true events, I realized this is a gift from God. I'm not going to sell this off. I'm actually going to make my own production company to insulate the development of this story from God's whisper to my heart to the theatrical release so that it doesn't get defiled like everything that Disney touches these days.
Yeah.
And so we actually have a Roman epic that's going to happen after the Love on the Run movie. Now, the Love on the Run movie hadn't even been a thing until June of last year when I do meet the love of my life, Olivia Pollock, now Morse, because
Mm.
she too was a January 6er. She actually went on the run, as you know very well, Lou, for over a year. She
Yeah.
decides to cut her ankle monitor off. She's from Florida. She's wild. She's a
Dang, he's
fighter.
a
She
gangster.
decides she's a gangster, dude. Yeah. So she cuts her ankle monitor. She's on the run. And yep. And well, she's defying tyranny in what way that she can. And so she
That's
finally gets
awesome.
caught on January 6th of 2024. They catch up with her or catch up to her with the helicopter. And then she does 13 months in the DC gulag, which was pretty wild. And so
She's
she's
a bit
done
more
time as well.
crazy. She's a bit more wild than you are. I'm gonna have to talk to her,
That's
man.
why I
That's
married her, man. That's why I married her. And so
that's
I meet her in June of last year, and she's up there at a speaking engagement talking about our founding fathers and God and country and everything. And I'm like, that is my wife. And I've been looking a
Wow.
long time for that woman. And she knew it too, which is the craziest thing. So we immediately fall in love. And I was kind of going around the country gathering support for the company and stuff. And I was challenged not to pursue the Roman epic, but to pursue my own story instead
Right.
as the stepping stone for the Roman epic. So we set aside time. We drafted the script up about my survival through prison, her survival on the run, how we meet and fall in love. And so now principal photography starts August 22nd for the January 6th themed love story, Love on the Run, where, you see two people based off of their youth and their God. They're able to defy tyranny and never give up, to inspire people to want to love their country and understand that we live in a republic, not a democracy, that's worth fighting for. And it's a beautiful story. You were there, you got to hear it. And
Yeah,
when people heard it, people were in tears, people
they
were
were.
cheering. It's a powerful story. And so we're very excited to do this because the history of January 6th needs to be
For
fixed.
sure.
And this movie is going to have that potential, as well as being a stepping stone to the Roman epic. You got to make American graffiti before you make Star Wars, baby. And so that's the game plan. Now, real quick, because I know we're running out of time, we named the company Lego Man Productions, not
Right.
only as an homage to the whole Lego Man, catastrophe that blew up at my apartment, but the interesting thing about that was when I was cultivating friends and alliances for the company very early on, while pursuing the Roman movie, Romans speak Latin to one another, and a buddy of mine confronts me and he says, "Hey, do you know what Lego man in Latin means?" Now, in
Hmm.
Greek, it means I speak. But in Latin, which is what the Romans communicated in to one another, Lego man means I anoint men or I assemble men.
Hmm.
So,
Beautiful.
like Abraham, like Jacob, like Saul, all these men in the Bible that we trust were
David.
renamed by God. I have now been renamed Lego Man, which means I anoint and assemble men. And what better name to give to a company that's going to anoint and assemble men to save their country once and for all?
I love it, man. Listen, Robert Morse, thank you so much for your time today. Listen, I know God is with you, bro, because you got such a great attitude despite the injustice you had to endure. So God is with you. Is God going to continue to bless you? Now you're bright as well. I learned a lot today, man. And so if you like today's episode, put a comment, share it with other people, subscribe. If you know anyone out there who has a story that needs to be told, inbox me, email me, loupimber.com, and never stop believing, keep building the faith. Robert, thank you so much. I appreciate you being here. I'll talk to you all very soon. Until next time, okay? Take care. Bye-bye.